And welcome back to class. Our focus for this video is criticisms of green building. Now, this slide is a repeat of another presentation, another video in this module, but that's because that's just how important it is. This is by far the biggest criticism that I've heard over the years and continue to hear today. So just to reiterate, when surveys are done, to ask real estate professionals what the extra first construction cost would be for green buildings, the answer is something around 15, 17% or so. However, research, that is research with many, many data points, usually peer-reviewed or supported by very large industry organizations, very well-reputed industry organizations, that set of research shows the answer is more like 0 to 4%, usually more like 0 to 2% if it's a kind of mid-range in terms of rigor, green building certification. And I'll just note that when there is a delta between perception and reality, that can also create business opportunities. This is true for the private equity firm where I worked for many years, where the perceived environmental risks around polluted real estate was much greater than the actual environmental risk and or financial risk. And because of that, we were often the only buyers of real estate with pollution, but real estate that happened to be in great locations. More on the criticism of cost. Again, a repeat of the graphic here, but this is important. Most decisions are made just based on first cost, that is construction cost, when in reality that's only 25% of the life cycle cost of most buildings, plus or minus. And if you thought at the very highest level, what if there was a 1% increase, right, on the front part of that in the construction cost, a 1% of that 25% versus a 1% savings, let's say, in operational cost over the building's life cycle. Just that simple math is a 3x return, right? And then that's not the case. It's too simple of a math problem. But the point is, to make the business case, A, you get rid of the misperception about excessive extra first cost, and then B, you talk about considerable savings, call it 30% in the energy and water use for that building. This is a fun one. The criticism that green buildings are ugly. Now, part of the reason for this is that many early green buildings either were part of kind of a back to the land, natural building, cob or Strobel construction. And while I personally find that interesting and fun and has lots of merit, it is not mainstream. The other reason there is this perception about green buildings being ugly is that many early on had maybe more of a modern design, and some people just don't like modern architecture. But I'll tell you that green buildings can look almost any way you want them to look. Not like the slide right here, although I find that fascinating, not mainstream, and many would not choose that. The homes, the corporate buildings, the government buildings, etc., neighborhoods, they can all look just like any other building, any other development out there, but they can still achieve high levels of third-party certification. Green buildings result in construction delays. That is the concern. For sure, if you pick the wrong team that does not have experience building green buildings or sourcing green building products or managing a little more complicated green building systems, this can be the case. But first of all, the industry has matured so much over the last, call it 15 years. And second of all, many green buildings also include the process of integrated design. Integrated design means you have more stakeholders, more designers, builders, etc., those responsible for the building, more of those people involved earlier on in the planning process. To some degree, it's more cooks in the kitchen, which can be a bad thing, right? Too many opinions to properly manage. But the idea is that you catch problems early on, you get important input early on, you front load design, which actually can help deliver buildings that are more on time and more on budget than in a traditional, more linear design process. Green buildings, do they perform poorly? Certainly early on with green buildings, the item most criticized probably would be, say, toilets. Toilets that used less water per flush did not work very well, led to lots of complaints. Other systems as well, but those tend to have stood out. Look, when there is innovation, there will be errors, there will be failures for sure. It doesn't mean you, as we say in America at least, it doesn't mean you should throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't mean you should kind of get rid of the whole initiative, the whole plan, the whole new trend in an industry because of a few problems, a few kinks to work out. What I'll say is that today, many or most of the biggest names in real estate make green building a core part of their brand. And they're not doing it because green buildings perform poorly. They do it because of the opposite. Another big criticism here is that green building third-party certification is a big hassle. Now look, is it easier to build a building and not pursue certification? Sure it is. Again, if you pick the right team that is built to green building standards before, that has gone through certification before, that has systems in place to manage that effectively, then the odds are it's not going to be a big hassle. But there is value in having that stamp of approval, right? So that your audience, your stakeholders, right, know there's a difference between your building and another building, which may have solar panels on top, and that's it. That's all they thought about, right? There's a huge difference between those two buildings. And again, if you want to walk the talk, to stand out among the competition, that label does matter. A few key conclusions. I've said it a few times, I'll say it again. The first cost of green buildings is very comparable to conventional buildings, despite perceptions that they're still too expensive. Now, many of you watching this are not in the US or the EU, so this will vary country to country. As the sector evolves, matures, the gap between building green and building conventional buildings will continue to shrink. Regardless, picking architects, engineers, planners, contractors, etc., that have done it before, that is the best path to manage those costs. Second, green buildings can fit almost any architectural style. If you're concerned, or if your stakeholders' concern is that they look ugly or modern or too environmental, let's say, not mainstream, those days are gone, right? These buildings can look almost any way you want them to look. Finally, in big cities, green building is increasingly associated with the best real estate from the best developers and owners. So if it's the office building sector in the US, Class A is the best. In most big cities, most Class A buildings being built today would pursue a green building standard. Finally, questions for you. So again, get out your pencil or pen and paper, pause the video, take a moment to reflect on these. Which of these green building criticisms do you understand the least? Spend, let's say, an hour this week reading more about it. Number two, how can your green building startup or corporate initiative focused on green building address one of these criticisms, and in doing so, win more customers and have more market share, right? A larger percentage of the market for whatever your product or service would be. Finally, when you make a pitch for green building market opportunities, what is your, let's say, 2-minute elevator speech? If you haven't heard the term elevator speech, the idea is if you're in an elevator, perhaps an elevator in a very tall building, what would you say to a decision maker standing next to you if the opportunity arose? So I'd encourage you to draw from the readings and the videos in this module and write out what your elevator pitch could be this week or next. All right, great. We'll see you on the next video.